Dave at Consular Education. I'm recording this during the February half term 2020 in the UK. The vast majority of teachers at this point are on half term, taking a well-earned break from the very different pressures that come from teaching online. And of course, some teachers haven't been doing that at all. They've been working in schools with the children of key workers and vulnerable children and so on. But whatever's happened, I'm sure you are taking a well-earned break at this point, and that's usually a time when we can kind of browse and see what's new out there in education and maybe buy ourselves a book or two. So I thought I would take the opportunity just to do a book review. Actually, it's not a book review in that sense, it's just a recommendation. I'm going to over the next few months perhaps recommend some books to you that I think will be useful from a practical point of view for people who are managing challenging behaviour in the classroom. And certainly this is one of the books that I want to do that kind of recommendation of and with, and it's this book. It's Running the Room Companion by Tom Bennett. It's the companion, and that's important. The companion to the original Running the Room, which I've got on my iPad here. So I suppose the obvious question would be, do I need to buy both Running the Room and the Running the Room companion? Well, I'll perhaps get onto that later on. In reality, the Running the Room, the main text, is a book that covers the principles behind an approach and a perspective on behaviour management. And the companion is the much more practical guide to what can I do next day at school to manage these kinds of behaviours. There is still a practical element to the original book, of course, but this is the more practically based companion to the original. So it might be that perhaps a senior leader might think, well, I'm probably better off with the main book. Teachers at the chalkface might say, well, the companion's better for me. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So the Run the Room companion then, it is a book by Tom Bennett, who is a government advisor and is involved in some key strategies that are coming out at the moment and approaches that are being developed. Like every behaviour management writer and personality, I suppose, people can have quite a polarised opinion, one way or the other, like a loathe, and often not much in between. We get through social media to see these people comment on a wide range of issues, not just in education, and we can of course reply back to them via social media. So sometimes I see this quite polarised view about the key players in behaviour management, and for me that's not really too much use one way or the other. I think from my perspective it's good to be able to pick bits out that you like from one approach or another, and not necessarily sit in one of those camps. That's not sitting on the fence. It's an approach in its own right. Take the bits that suit you and make them your own. So whilst I understand that there are a range of opinions about behaviour, and that this particular writer can only present his, that's not me necessarily saying this is the only way, and in fact I don't think Tom Bennett does that either in his book. So anyway, let's see what we've got here. Well, it is a kind of self-help format. You can dip in and dip out, which I quite like. There's a lot of what you would expect in here. There are some uncomfortable truths that we need to consider about whose role is it to manage behaviour and who isn't responsible for it in certain settings. It is very practical by its nature. So there's a great chapter 5 that I think encapsulates what behaviour management, proactive behaviour management, is all about for me, which is make it easy to behave and hard not to. I think that's actually key to how we develop our routines, and the reason why we develop our routines in classroom, so that we can we can have a classroom where behaviour management is relatively straightforward because the behaviour norms are being followed in our classroom. So it's quite nice to have that kind of practical element to it. I think it's also a very realistic book. So, you know, there are times when it mentions that, you know, there's some kids that won't achieve and some the level of behaviour that we want, and there are strategies that won't work with certain students, and not just SEND, and you know, kids who have complex issues and so on and so forth. And this book recognizes that not every technique will work every time. You know, it's not a sort of magic cure. It's not a silver bullet for every behavior management issue. I really liked that the book challenges some of the issues that teachers often talk about, and actually the key issue that I hear time and time again is about low-level disruption. I have done my own video on low-level disruption. You'll find a link below if you want to have a look at that. But I do think that anybody who is purporting to be able to help with behaviour management should be able to advise you on how you manage low-level disruption. And I think a lot of people who write about it skirt around the issue and leave it a little bit woolly and vague, and it's not always, you know, the clarity that you want when you are faced with low-level disruption, which can be quite disheartening. You know, some schools, of course, there's no disruption at all. Wonderful. That's not the reason why we're, you know, doing a video like this, is it? So the fact that there's a chapter on low-level disruption, I think, is really good, and the fact that it really tackles it, and you know, there are techniques to use. This is how you're going to prevent low-level disruption. This is how you're going to respond to it while you're in the process of preventing it for the future. So I think that's really useful, that it takes that challenge and kind of meets it head on. There's also elements in there that I think are really refreshing to see, in terms of this seem a little bit old-fashioned almost, I suppose, but things I really care about in my classroom, which is being able to work in silence and having good manners. And I think sometimes when we talk about being able to work in silence, people will kind of spout the same thing about, you know, well, a noisy classroom isn't necessarily a place where learning isn't happening, and a silent classroom isn't necessarily a place where learning is happening. And I get that, and I understand it, and we don't, you know, again, that's very polarizing. We don't need to think like that. I want to be able to have silence in my class when it's necessary, and if you can't do that, then this book will show you how. And actually, it's about that one of those other principles that Tom Bennett talks about and covers very, very clearly in the original book, but also does in the companion, is that idea that behaviour is a curriculum and you need to teach it, and that is so true. And you know, I personally use a routine for volume levels in my classroom, and I teach that as much as I teach my subject, because it needs to be taught. Behaviour needs to be taught. In the same way that you can teach manners, you know, you can use your subject as a vehicle to do it, but you can teach manners. So I quite like that idea that you know, we teach behaviour as a curriculum, and that is a thread that runs throughout the book. I suppose people will find that a little bit old-fashioned, I suppose, but it's also, you know, important. You know, it's stood the test of time because it's effective, I suppose. So yeah, it talks to you about routines and how to embed those routines with groups, whether they are, you know, super challenging or otherwise. And there's also a chapter on what I call the re-establishment or the reboot. So you might need to reboot with a group when everything's gone completely wrong and you're thinking, you know, I don't know what to do next. I might need to buy myself some cattle prods or something. When you get to that stage, then you have to worry that the function of the behaviour that kids are demonstrating in your classroom is to defy any attempts you make to change the way behaviour goes in your class, and that's a nightmare scenario to be in. So when we're in a position where we need to do this reboot, you know, switch it off and wait a couple of minutes, switch it back on again, or re-establishment as I call it, that can be quite a challenging experience, but we need to do it. And so chapter 10, I think it is, maybe chapter 11, there's a reboot framework, if you like, in there. I think the reboot's really valuable. So yeah, my underlying sense with the book is that it's considering it's a companion book, considering that it's meant to accompany another book, it feels very much like a book with no loose ends. There's nothing vague about it. There's nothing, you know, you don't finish it with more questions. You will have some questions, of course, when you read it, and you'll flip back and read through sections, and it's very easy to find the answers. So you come away from having, and I've read it twice now, you come away from having read it feeling that's very complete. There's nothing that I want to, there's no loose threads I want to grab and start unraveling and asking questions. It feels like it's a package in itself, I suppose. So you know, and as I said, that's despite it being a companion to another book, which I think is really good. One of the kind of bonuses, an unexpected bonus, and a bonus you can't really expect actually, is the writing styles are really engaging, it's really entertaining, there's a lot of humour in there. And you might think they're not really that important in a book of this kind, but it's always nice to see someone who uses language in an entertaining, engaging way, and that certainly happens with this book and the original book actually. And to be fair, some of the writers on behaviour that I've seen, the likes of Rob Plevin, for example. So in terms of buying both, if you are a senior leader and you buy the original, you'll want to buy this. If you are a classroom teacher and you buy this, you'll probably want the original. So that's, you know, I would probably go that way, you know, for in terms of buying them in order. Certainly this one for the practically based stuff, and the other book for the underlying principles, with still lots of practical stuff in there. So yeah, that's my sense on it. So I'm recommending that you maybe have a look at this book and see what you think. Okay, that's it for now. I'll be reviewing other books at some point in the future. Remember, the Behaviour Ninja app is available for you if that's something that you're interested in. I'll put the links below as always, and you know, like and subscribe, and keep a lookout for future recommendations. Okay, enjoy the rest of your half term if you're on it, of course, and I'll see you again soon. Bye bye.